What's up guys, my name is Ace, and recently I made a video talking about the finals and how much I've been enjoying it lately. I just recently went back, and I really didn't plan on going much beyond that one video, just kind of sharing my updated thoughts on the game. However, the response to that video was very positive overall, and I had a ton of people asking me about my controller setting, because I pointed to that as one of the reasons that early on in the game, when it first launched, I had a hard time getting into it because I didn't really tweak the controller settings a whole lot, and it just felt a little bit off. But recently, when I went back to it, I spent a lot more time dialing things in and getting into a much better state, and this feels significantly better for me, and it's one of the reasons I've been enjoying it so much more. So in today's video, I wanted to go through all of the controller settings that I landed on for the finals that work really well for me. Now, of course, just like with any video like this, most settings are going to come down to personal preference and playstyle, and I'm in no way claiming that if you just copy and paste these settings, you're suddenly going to be an aiming god with a controller in this game. Maybe for some of you, you will, but for many of you, you'll definitely want to make some adjustments here. The main reason I wanted to share this, though, is I think this is at least a better starting point to build off of compared to the default settings in the game. So without further ado, let's dive right into this with my sensitivity values. And the values I landed on here are 240 for horizontal and 170 for vertical. And for you Call of Duty players out there, which makes up the majority of my audience, just for reference in that, I play on a 1.65 sensitivity for both horizontal and vertical. But in this game, I just found this ratio tends to work quite well, where you definitely want your horizontal sensitivity to be a little bit higher than your vertical. So if you plan on adjusting any of these values, I would recommend maintaining at least a somewhat similar ratio. Maybe you want a slightly different ratio, but this ratio works really well for me. And then when it comes to my zoom sensitivity multiplier, in most games I have this at like 75 to 80%, but in this game I actually go a little bit lower at 65%, and a big reason behind that is the slow time to kill in this game. You often need to be tracking your target for a much longer period of time, and therefore I really want as much precision as I can get while aiming down sights, and this is going to help a lot with that. So that's why I keep that fairly low at 65%. However, that was way too low for my scoped zoom sensitivity multiplier, and that's an area where I was actually really struggling with, and I just recently dialed these settings in for sniping. With this, I prefer this being a much higher value at 135%. Otherwise, I just find I can't track targets at all in close range, and therefore I'm just useless with a sniper rifle outside of anything but like extremely long ranges. So I actually go fairly high with that, and I'm quite happy with where I've landed with my sniper sensitivity now. My sniper aim is feeling significantly better than it was previously. Next, for focal length sensitivity scaling, I just leave that on. If you turn that off, it feels really weird and you have to adjust all your settings all over again, so I just leave that on. And next, we're gonna look at our horizontal look boost. So this is the boost that you get when you fully deflect your aiming stick all the way to the side. So if you really want to spin all the way around as fast as possible, this gives you that additional acceleration, which, especially if you're a more aggressive player, I tend to be a light main in the finals, it is very helpful to be able to turn on a dime quite quickly. So if you're grappling behind somebody, for instance, you can quickly spin around and attack them in that way. Whereas if you don't have that acceleration, it's going to take you far too long to spin around and get on target. And for me, I ended up landing on 320 for this value. I tried a little bit lower, a little bit higher, and 320 was just right for me. However, I do want to point out for vertical, I leave this on 0. I don't want any acceleration or any additional acceleration on my vertical boost. And the main reason behind that is you never have to pull a 180 with your vertical sensitivity. You're never needing to go from looking all the way perfectly straight up to all the way perfectly straight down, ever, really. And at most, you're generally going to stay within a couple story range, and like this is the general range that you need to be moving. And within that range, you don't need any acceleration for the most part, at least in my experience. So that's why I leave that value at 1. Now, when it comes to look boost ramp up time, this goes hand in hand with the previous settings we just looked at. This is how long you have to have your stick fully deflected before you get to that maximum acceleration. So setting it quite high, like all the way up to 2 seconds, it's going to take such a long time to reach that maximum acceleration that you likely will never get to that point because a lot changes in 2 seconds and you'll often be shifting your aim before you do that. So for me, I like this feeling a lot more responsive, and that's why I set this at 0.1. I was playing around with 0.2 for a while. That felt pretty good, but I just felt I could use even more responsiveness out of it, so that's why I'm currently using 0.1. However, keep in mind, with those values we just talked about, that's when we're not aiming down sights. When you are aiming down sight, this is where our zoom look boost values come in. And for this, I don't like a ton of acceleration when aiming down sight because, like I said, I want that precision while aiming down sight. I don't want my aim to be accelerating like crazy. However, I did want to bump this up a little bit from the default value for my horizontal look boost, and this does just allow me to track targets a bit better. If I'm in really close quarter situations and they're moving, I don't have to come out of aiming down sight as often because I get that little extra boost as I fully deflect the stick. So it does allow me to track a bit better, but again, I don't want to go too high with that value. So 80 is what I landed on for horizontal, and for vertical, I just left that on the default. Because in this case, while aiming down sight, if somebody is dropping from a building, for instance, I do want to have the speed while aiming down sight to be able to keep up with that person that's falling, because it obviously sucks if they're falling faster than you can move your aim, but I didn't want that value to go much higher than that, so the default value actually felt pretty good. However, the ramp up time on this, I like being just a little bit slower than when I'm not aiming down sight, so I left this at 0.2 or 200 milliseconds. Now, when it comes to dead zones, I find in the finals, these dead zone values you can set much lower than many other games. Like Call of Duty, for instance, with the same controller in Call of Duty, in order to not get stick drift, I need to have my inner dead zone set to roughly 3 or 4. Anything lower than that, and I'm going to get some stick drift. Whereas in this game, I can set it all the way down on 1 and I get 0 stick drift whatsoever. There's no movement. And as a result, in the finals especially, I would recommend dropping this as low as possible, probably down to like 1 to 2. But obviously this will depend on your controller. For some people that get a lot of stick drift on their controller, you might have to bump this a little bit higher. But for me, I went with 1 and 1 on this, and I've seen 0 stick drift whatsoever. And now let's get into our response curve. And relative to Call of Duty, the closest thing you'll find here is exponential is like your standard response curve in Call of Duty, where a little bit of input is going to give you a very, very fine control, a very slow movement, whereas it ramps up as you move your stick more and more and more. It will ramp up exponentially until you get to the point where you're fully deflected. That tends to give you a lot of fine control with really small movements, but it's not as snappy or responsive as sinusoidal, which is very comparable to the dynamic curve in Call of Duty. This is much twitchier, snappier, gives you a lot more of that snappy feeling with a little bit of movement with your aim. And especially in this game for me, I like playing quite fast. I like that snappiness with my movement. So I go with sinusoidal on that, but this is one setting that is going to be a very personal setting that comes down to your own personal feel. You could also use linear as well. I know a lot of people like a linear response curve as well, but yeah, this is one where you just have to play around with it for yourself and see what feels best for you. And then when it comes to our look acceleration, I played around with this quite a bit, and 0 just felt best for me. It just felt more responsive, and I didn't feel like I was sacrificing much in the control department, so 0% works for me, but again, adjust it to your liking. Now for my bindings, I didn't change anything here. I like all of these as just default values. For me, I play with a tactical layout in Call of Duty, and as a result, I like having my crouch and slide toggle on R3. So that means for me, melee is circle, whereas I believe the default is the opposite setting here. Everything else with my bindings is just default. And now let's get down into the aim assist section here. We've actually got quite a bit of control over our aim assist. You can just turn it on or off entirely. But if you have it on, we have more options here. We have our sensitivity reduction. This is our aim assist slowdown. So as you sweep across a target, it will slow down your sensitivity as it sweeps across that target. Then after that, we have target tracking, and this is rotational aim assist. So with this one, if you're moving your feet and aiming down sight, you will see that it kind of just slightly rotates your character in the direction of the enemy. This isn't as strong as Call of Duty's rotational aim assist in my experience so far, but especially against moving targets, you can see it does pull a little bit toward that target. I'm only touching my left stick here. I'm not touching the right stick at all, but yeah, definitely not as strong as Call of Duty. And then finally for aim assist, we have zoom snapping. And this is something that Call of Duty doesn't use for multiplayer, but it does use for zombies and campaign. And with this, what happens is if you're slightly off target before aiming down sight, and then you do aim down sight, it will just slightly pull your aim in the direction of the target. It doesn't like snap right to the center of their character model or anything, but you can see it just gradually, every time I aim down sight, it's getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer to center mass on this target. So this is fairly subtle. I would recommend just keeping it on because it does help a little bit. It's not super obvious. I don't find it's annoying and gets in the way as well. I know some games, they get a little bit overboard with the snapping to the point where it actually throws me off at times. But in this game, it's quite subtle, and therefore I just leave it on. And with that, that's pretty much it. Aside from controller vibration, I always turn this off. I just find it to be an unnecessary distraction. I don't like controller vibration, but some people do. And with that, this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about your controller settings, or just the controller settings in general in the finals? Do you guys generally like the controller feel in this game, or do you feel it's lacking? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.